It's Friday! Woohoo! Been a long week, but here we are with another episode of Community from Within, Economic Development Podcast with Dwayne MacEachern. Welcome. Okay, so it's Friday when I'm recording this anyway. I don't know when I'll get it posted, but been a long week and I'm driving home as usual, so let's hit the road. This episode, which I believe will be episode number 31 of the podcast, but only number 2 of the YouTube series. Something I wanted to say first and foremost. So I recorded the first video earlier in the week. I just posted it yesterday. And of course, I had to take the raw video and edit it, cut it, put the introduction, music, graphics, all these things into it. And so I had to do all that. And then I wanted to, being it's the first one, I wanted to watch the whole. It's like a 34-minute video in total, so I wanted to watch the whole thing, which I did, and that's and great. But what I noticed was I was looking at the camera quite a bit. I was looking at I wasn't. Obviously, I drove home. I drove all the way. Nothing happened. It was fine, but like if I was sitting here talking to somebody beside me, I might be sitting there going, "Hey, how's it going?" Blah blah blah, and take my eyes off the roads. But there's nobody beside me. It's just me and the camera. That's you. And I was just really conscious of the fact that it looked like I was watching the video, going, "Oh my God, Dwayne, keep your eyes on the road." So I'm going to be more conscious of that now, not looking directly at the camera as often. I'll give you a little glance once in a while, but I want you to rest assured that I'm doing this safely. So, I think my first one was nervous, making sure I was in the scope of the camera and everything. And anyway, I am driving, so keep my eyes on the road. Now, so for this episode, I want to dive into a little bit about the concept of ABCD, or asset-based community development. I've probably talked a little bit about this in the podcast earlier, but since I'm rebooting here with the YouTube series, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, so bear with me. Asset-based community development is looking at the assets in your community. How can you make something of those assets to get what you need or want for your community? And this can be done at a household level. It can be done at a local community, village level. It can be done as a town or a city or any municipality, or as a country, technically. You look at your assets. And there's a lot of tools, techniques, tips, all kinds of ways of going about it. But the idea is it's a positive approach. It's not a negative approach. You're not approaching community development from a deficit point of view. You're not sitting here going, what's wrong with our community? What do we need in our community? What are we lacking? And how do you fix these problems? It's what do we have that's great about our community? And how can we use those things that are great to build on them and make it even more great? And I could talk for hours about asset-based community development and my experience in that, and that's part of what the podcast is all about. But rather than just taking my word for it here, I'm going to do this a little differently. There's a video online. Okay, it's cut into 3 parts. But it's one talk by one individual. His name is Peter Kenyon. Peter Kenyon is like in the asset-based community development world, he's like a guru kind of guy. He's been in it for many years. He knows his stuff. He's got great examples. He gives talks around the world. He was at the Coady International Institute in Antigonish, part of St. Francis Xavier University, and which is my alma mater, and I'm a graduate of the Coady Institute as well in their asset-based community development program. And so Peter Kenyon was there. It was before I got involved, but I think it's the early 2000s when this talk was given. And so I'm going to cut in the 3 parts of their video from. It's on YouTube. They created a channel for the Coady Institute specifically for that conference. You can find it Coady ABCD. That's COADY ABCD. If you search that and Peter Kenyon, you'll find the videos in the raw form. But I'm going to cut them in here. Each segment is about 10 minutes long, so it's a 30-minute talk. And I'm just going to play that, and you can listen to it. If you're listening to this in podcast form, you can watch the video in video form on YouTube. And it's if you're just listening to it, it's okay. I don't think you're going to miss anything, because Peter Kenyon, he's a great public speaker. He talks to all his points. He has a slideshow he's showing. So there's a couple things you might miss out on, but really he's very descriptive and talks about everything he's showing. So for the most part, you're not missing anything by just listening to this. So I just want to make sure. So just hypothetically, obviously, I want to make sure I'm clear about this. It's not my video I'm showing. If in 1,000 years from now I have enough views that I start getting monetized, and this video I'm making makes money, obviously I'm voluntarily demonetizing this one or transferring the monetization to the Coady Institute. I'm using their video here for this, so I just wanted to clear that out of the way. But they put the video out there because they want people to look at their communities with an ABCD mindset, and I want to promote this video for them, and I want you to see this. And for me, it's like I watched it last night, and I watch this video a few times every year, and it just, wow, it's a boost for me. It's a real motivational boost. He's very passionate about community development, and he gives great examples. So let's just jump right into that. So we'll go into the very first part. There's an introduction there by Gord Cunningham. Gord was the asset-based community development program coordinator or co-coordinator at the time, and he's actually now today, I believe, the director of the Coady Institute. So we'll jump into that right now. Here's part 1 of Peter Kenyon's talk at the ABCD conference at the Coady Institute, St. X University, back, I believe, in the early 2000s. So here you go.
Our final guest, we're again absolutely delighted to have here, very fortunate to have here. He's Peter Kenyon from Oz, Australia. He's incredibly well known as a social entrepreneur and community enthusiast. He's incredibly well known here in Canada. He spent the last 10 days in other parts of the country. When they heard he was coming to Nova Scotia, people grabbed him. And there's even people who have driven up from Halifax tonight, I think, to see him. He's worked with over 1,000 communities throughout Australia and internationally, seeking to facilitate fresh and creative ways to stimulate community and economic renewal. He's motivated by a desire to create healthy, caring, inclusive, sustainable, and enterprising communities and local economies. He has a background, as Jody has pointed out, as a youth worker, teacher, youth education officer, and tertiary lecturer. His employment experiences have included Director of Employment in Western Australia, Manager of the Community Employment Development Unit in New Zealand, and coordinator of the Natal KwaZulu job creation and enterprise strategy in South Africa. What I'm most excited to hear about is something that I've been reading about, is the creation of the Bank of Ideas. IDEAS being an acronym that stands for Initiatives for the Development of Enterprising Action and Strategies in 1991. And that creation has led to a lot of people wanting to hear what he has to say in many countries. In fact, he's worked as a consultant in more than 52 countries since 91. Since 2004, he spent a part of each year working in a range of Middle Eastern and North African countries, assisting with the development of national youth policies and strategies. He's authored 16 publications within the fields of community and economic development, youth policy development, and youth enterprise. Please join me in welcoming Peter Kenyon.
Thanks, Good, for that very positive introduction. I can hardly wait to hear myself speak after that occasion. Can I just begin by saying good evening, bonsoir, and good day. Everyone should know one word or bit of language from every race, and we in Australia say good day. So can we just practice that? Good day. No. You say it like the Poms. Just say good day, drag it out. Good day. You know, one bit of Aussie. Okay, one bit of Oz. Can I say I have learnt two things in Canada? Firstly, all the road signs say the maximum speed is 100 kilometres. No one ever drives 100 kilometres here. Everyone knows it really is meant 120 kilometres. And secondly, when they say that you can speak for 15 minutes, everyone knows it doesn't mean... It's somewhere between 35 minutes and 55 minutes. But I can say that I have been in a worse situation. I was in a conference in South Africa, and they invited the Minister for Economic Development to open it. And they said to him, you've got 10 minutes to paint some themes. We're 2 hours, 35 minutes later, the Minister is still winding on. His wife in the front row was trying to give him the evil sign to kind of like get him to shut up, the evil eye. He went on and on. But to give this guy credit, he eventually realised what he did. And I'll never forget, he looked at his watch and said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm awfully sorry, but my watch has stopped. But what was worse, someone in the back row yelled up, there was a bloody calendar on the wall. So anyway, I know that a number of us are very keen to get to the pub and whatever, but can I just say I'm from this place called Australia. It's a place of amazing landscapes, and above all, we happen to be honoured to live in a country of the oldest kind of like continuous culture on the face of the earth, and that is our Indigenous people. And some of those nations, and it's 300 different nations, when the colonists turned up, it was an incredibly established set of nations, and some of those dated back 60,000 years. So we're very privileged to live in a very rich culture. My passion is simply how do we create healthy, kind of like connected, inclusive, kind of like communities and local economies. It's what motivates me, it's what excites me, and it's why I'm particularly excited about this thing called asset-based community development, because it actually helps to give me a framework and helps to help me understand it. And I want to very quickly, in my 15 minutes, to very quickly kind of like point out some of the things, and really it's very much going to reiterate. I've got an Irish background, and we have a very simple formula for giving a speech. First tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you've told them. And so tonight I'm just going to reiterate. But look, the starting point, and this is why the citizen-driven stuff is so important, is that meaningful and lasting change only originates from within. And it seems to me that so much of what we call development is professionals and government agencies and international groups doing things to community. My great friend here in Canada, Harold Fleming from the Ontario Rural Council, put it so well when he said, the wisdom of the community always exceeds the knowledge of the experts. And if I have to have a quote that is my favourite, it would have to be that. It's something that I, every day, have to remember. And that is simply the people that live in these communities, know these communities, understand these communities far better than I will ever be able to do. My job is to open doors and windows where that knowledge can actually come out, but the knowledge very much rests there. The second thing that I'm aware of, though, is that certainly within the Australian context, most of our communities are made up of spectators. We are made up of inhabitants and residents who have given up involvement in the community, and certainly a challenge is how do we get that broad-based community going. I actually think that we run most of our communities like we play football, where 40,000 people who need the exercise turn up to watch 36 players who don't. And it seems to me that's the challenge. How do we start to get it? You know, same old faces at the meeting ain't good community development. And it seems to me, how do we start to embrace very much everyone in the community? The second thing that we really have learned is that community residents act responsibly when they care, when we discover what is it that people can care about. And I think it's about trying to explore that. And they very much do support what they create. Engaging them right at the start, finding those pressure points of care within the community, I think is incredibly powerful. Margaret Wheatley puts it so well, there's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. And I believe a lot of what community development is trying to find that point. What is it that we as a community really do care about? And begin to start with that particular point. The third thing is that effective, kind of like ABCD, understands that kind of like social connectedness and building relationships are really the most important parts of community development. It is about bringing people into relationships. It is about connecting people. And I love this African proverb. I'm currently doing a lot of work in Somalia, and someone shared that with me, and I love it. If you want to go faster, go alone. If you want to go further, go together. Isn't that powerful? I just love it. It's a magnificent one. That whole thing, that when we can start to get people holding hands and starting to work together, that's the way we need to go. The fourth thing, and Jody has just so well articulated that tonight, communities have never been built on dwelling on their deficiencies. We've got to focus on resources, capacity, strengths and aspirations of the community and its residents instead of the needs, deficiencies and problems. It's at the heart. That great analogy of the half full, half empty. And people get that. You know, when you hold it up, you know, is the glass half full or half empty? Well, it's both. But you can't do much with the top bit. It's that bottom bit. And people can really get that and start to work on it. Now that is an Australian town entry sign. That is what I'd call a deficiency-focused community. I mean, this is a dying community. This community has halved its population in the last 10 years. Why would you put up a sign like that? We have 2 cemeteries but no hospital, you know. Now, that's the extreme example of what we call a deficiency need-focused kind of like community.
Okay, so there's part 1. I thought I could just splice all 3 together and make it seamless, but I thought, well, since it's broken up in 3 parts anyway, that's a little bit easier for me to just give a little breakdown and commentary as we're going along, just briefly. I hope you understand. You see what I'm saying. He's a very enjoyable speaker to listen to, and you can feel his energy and his passion. Yeah, he just really gets me going. I think that's the quote there. The wisdom of the community will always exceed the knowledge of the experts. The wisdom of the community always exceeds the wisdom of the experts. That's a really important point. And we sometimes forget about that sort of thing in community development. Especially, I find, not always, but sometimes when you're dealing with government or government agencies. They want to, you know, they have their list of consultants and experts who can come in and look at things. And, you know, it's just a really important point. Community development, you know, is traditionally in a lot of ways been a top-down process driven by government in some cases. And what this is about is asset-based community development is beginning with the community level. So that's a really important point. And yeah, let's just jump into part 2 of the video. I'm very conscious of the fact that we're running out of time here. It's getting dark. Let's go. This part 2. Peter Kenyon, ABCD.
But what I do want to share with you, and I just want to do a couple of stories and a couple of quotes tonight, and I've got 11 minutes to go, is just simply this. This is the second nicest community in the world after the one you come from. It's an amazing place. It's in New Zealand. It's called Kaikoura. But in 1987, 88, this place was in all sorts of trouble. Agriculture had collapsed. The fishing industry collapsed. Their railway service centre in one day went from 260 jobs to 1. This is a town of 4,000 people that were reeling. And particularly, the group who made up 70% of its population, the local indigenous Maoris, was suffering from unemployment. They had a 95% unemployment rate. It was a community in crisis. But it's interesting to see how in 20 years it's reinvented itself. It's amazing. And it's actually embraced this industry. It is the world's biggest and fastest growing industry called tourism. Have a look at that. In 20 years ago, 3,500 international visitors. 20 years on, 650,000. An amazing kind of like reinvention for a community that's 3 hours from a major city on a road to nowhere. What I find absolutely amazing is kind of like the business life that's been created by all of that, and the fact that 80% of that change is ordinary people starting to get into business, and particularly local Maori people. But what I find even more amazing is that one business has actually driven it, and that's a business created by the most disadvantaged group in town. Local people creating a whale watch business. And what I find exciting about this is that back there in 1989, unemployed Maoris came together in their marae, sat down and started talking not about their problems and how bad it was they were all unemployed, but what is it we've got? They were a group who started to look at their assets. They had meetings where people didn't talk about the problems, they talked about opportunities and what were their assets. And one night, one young guy said, you know, out there in that ocean, at any one time of the year, we've got 100 whales. You know, we know all about those whales. Legend has it that we arrived in this country on the back of a whale. We know about these whales because our fathers, our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers were fishermen. We know all about them. Wonder whether people will pay to come and see them. And so this group started to test an idea, starting with a natural asset that actually sat out there in the ocean. They mortgaged their houses. They were poor people, but they decided to take some risk. They certainly weren't greatly assisted by government. And you know what I find incredible is that they did mortgage their houses to buy this. A boat to take out 16 people 4 times a day is how they started 20 years ago. They started with an asset. And with that asset, they created a window of opportunity. Have a look what's happened in 20 years. Today, they're the biggest employer in town. Today, they actually have 200,000 customers in any one year. They won the British Airways Best Ecotourism Award. And besides running a whale watch business, this group, who were 95% unemployed, few kind of like financial assets, now run the biggest coach company on the South Island of New Zealand. They run the biggest aquaculture farm in New Zealand. They've got a chain of 9 coffee shops, and all the new technology in Australian airports to do with our new anti-terrorism arrangements comes from their company. Isn't that an incredible story? And this is a group who decided to look at their assets and do something with it and take some risk. This is Kaikoura. It's still only a community of 4,000, but have a look at their latest initiative. It's building an international whale watch research and conference centre. An amazing story. This is the latest story, and that's 20 years of development. An amazing story by a group who were 95% unemployed. And you know, at the heart of it was one of their greatest assets, a young guy, Wally Stone. You know why he's famous? He's the youngest convicted drug dealer in New Zealand's history. At age 10, was found peddling drugs. He went to a reform school, did community work, believed in this ABCD stuff, came back to his hometown as the project person, convinced them. He was the one who said, look at these whales. He became the general manager. And believe it or not, for the last decade, he has also been the country's chairman of their tourism board, probably the second most important position in New Zealand after the Prime Minister is the person who heads tourism. No country does tourism better than New Zealand. And this is the guy who's done it. And he is the youngest convicted drug dealer in New Zealand's history. He was incredibly enterprising at a very early age. And so, number 5, the strength of a community is directly proportional to the level that the diversity of its residents desire and able to contribute their abilities and assets to the well-being of the community. We've got to believe that. We've got to develop that passion to see that everyone has kind of like got a capacity to contribute. And you know what I reckon is the greatest asset in every community is that group. They're called young women and men. And yet, how often through a thing I call adultism, we discount their contribution. You know, adultism is as bad as sexism and racism. It is saying that because of their lack of experience, we shouldn't take them as serious. We shouldn't involve them. And yet, you know, we're doing what history has told us all the time. We see them as causing problems, having problems, and are problems, you know? That's how we see young people. We always have. Look what Socrates said 2,500 years ago. You know, they have our youth of today love luxury, bad manners, contempt of authority. What kind of awful creatures will they be when they grow up, you know? You know, look what Oscar Wilde said. The youth of the present day are quite monstrous. They have absolutely no respect to dyed hair, you know? The most cynical of all. Youth is such a wonderful thing. Bad luck we waste it on children, you know? You know where the word teenager comes from? It comes from the Latin word tiona. You know what it means? Grief, strife, and misery, you know? We really know how to kind of like treat our young people, you know? Amazing. But you know what? Start to look at the assets they bring. I mean, young people are incredible cooperators. They collaborate well. They're passionate about the critical issues today. You know, whenever I do a presentation, I need a 12-year-old there to kind of like run it. You know, they understand technology and stuff. And you know what? They know what other young people kind of like thinking and contribute far better than we can. That's just a start. You know, young people bring some incredible assets. And as one young South African put it to me, youth are the leaders of today, not tomorrow. We are assets, not liabilities. We're solutions, not a problem to be solved. You know, we've got to begin to take this group serious. We've got a great initiative that we're running in Australia called Are You Mad? It's funky, it's different, you know, and what's it stand for? Are you making a difference? We've got kids as young as 6, starting with what their passions are in creating a project. You know, there's 3 levels of madness that they can engage in. There's 8 levels of kind of like madness in terms of how you put a project together. An amazing little tool. Just go onto the website, you can download it and whatever. We run a copy left, not a copy right rule. You can pinch anything, you know. Look at this. This is an Are You Mad project. That's a 12-storey ugly water tower. But here's a group of young men who have artist talent, wanting to show what that talent's like. A group of Indigenous young males often discounted by Australian society. And as this guy said to me, us black fellas don't like heights. But look at this. Isn't that amazing? Absolutely amazing. I can tell you, every time they drive past that, there'll be a sense of pride of what they've actually contributed. Absolutely amazing. And you know, we've got to believe this. Every single person has capacities, abilities, gifts and ideas, and living the good life depends whether you use it. It's directly related. And I had a personal experience of this. I was young. I hadn't seen an uncle for 30 years. He'd gone off as a truckie and he'd trucked all over Australia. He'd kind of like become an alcoholic and a drug taker. He was the black sheep of the family. But suddenly, 30 years on after I'd seen him, I got a phone call to say, your uncle's dying. He's an acute diabetic. We just amputated both of his legs. He's lying in hospital covered in bed sores. He has 3 months to live, and he's asked if you could be contacted to see whether you could bring him home to his village and to the family so he could live out those last 3 months. You can imagine. And the hospital added, don't worry, we've already contacted the local village hospital and they're willing to park him in the hospital. Amazing. And so my uncle Les comes back. You can imagine he's lying there, covered in bed sores, depressed. The doctors had told him he's got 3 months to live. Everyone wanted to talk about his state, about his disabilities. But one day there was a mad orderly in the hospital. I'll never forget this guy. He was 19. He sits on his bed and he says, Les, I don't want to talk about your disabilities. I want to talk about your abilities. Our town has a challenge. We no longer have a courier service between the village and the capital, Perth. It's 100 kilometres away. What about going into business and starting up a transport service between our town and the capital?
Okay, so there's part two. One of the first things that strikes me when he's talking, especially about New Zealand, and he gives the example of the Kaikoura whale watch tours. Where did that all come about from? Like, and who was the driver of all that? And it's not, what strikes me is not the rich business people or the quote unquote community leaders necessarily. It was the unemployed people. And a strong point here too, it's the indigenous people in New Zealand who were involved and got this going and promoted the tourism. And they built it based on their knowledge and wisdom and heritage and culture and moved that forward. So wonderful example from New Zealand there. I love the story of Wally Stone, the first youngest convicted drug dealer in New Zealand's history. And as Peter Kenyon says, he was a very enterprising young man, obviously, yes, so no matter what a person's background, they can still have a positive contribution to the community. Anything else from part two? Oh, and young people, just having young people involved in general. It reminds me of, and I've talked about this in the podcast earlier, and I'll get into this more in the video series later on, but when I was about 12 years old, I went to a week-long program at what was then the University College of Cape Breton, now Cape Breton University. It was a summer program, like a summer camp for kids to learn business, science, technology, and entrepreneurship. And that 1 week-long summer camp for me, which in many ways the impetus for this podcast, it was called Monkey Business, the week-long camp. I almost called this podcast the Monkey Business Podcast because it really had a strong impact on me as a young person and made me want to think in an entrepreneurial way almost my entire life. And so having young people involved, getting their ideas and seeing that they have a positive contribution to make to the community is really important, because if you get the young minds at that age, they stick with it. When I was a young person, I remember not only that example, another time when our school, the local school, which was a primary to 12, like the consolidated school, needed a new playground. A lot of the money was raised by what was called the Home and School Association. It was parents and volunteers. And when they actually were getting ready to install the equipment that they're buying, there's a lot of work wheelbarrowing gravel and stuff around and digging holes for the posts and pouring concrete, stuff like that. And I remember my mother was going to volunteer because she was on the Home and School Association. She dragged me along. I was about, I can't remember, 10, 12, 13 years old, something. And I was the only child there. Everybody else were adults, part of the home and school. But I was there, and the adults that were there were complimenting me on being a young person involved and how it was great to see. And that encouragement at a young age stuck with me. And it was important to me my whole life to be a volunteer and to do things for the community. So, and be involved. So, again, as a young person, we have to find ways to get young people more involved. So, that's my comments on part 2. Let's jump into part 3 of Peter Kenyon's talk on ABCD.
When I heard it, I just burst out laughing. Here's a guy dying. He's got no legs. He's covered in bed sores. He's depressed. And this idiot is telling him to go into business. But you know what? Les got excited by it. And so did some of our friends. They modified a car so he could drive it without legs. They modified a trailer so he could do it. And he even used his disability as a marketing tool. He called it Legless Les's Courier Service, And you know what? He lived for 6.5 years longer than any doctor gave him. And for 6.5 years, this guy, despite needing to be on a machine 3 times a day, drove 250 kilometres. 5 days a week. Amazing story. And if I needed to believe in asset-based community development, I've got that. Don't dwell on people's disabilities, dwell on their abilities. And wow, exciting things can happen. Number 6, in every community, something works. Instead of asking what's wrong and how to fix it, ask what's worked and how do we get more of it. It's much more powerful, it drives energy. And that's why that whole appreciative approach. See, I see appreciative inquiry as probably the best tool we have in ABCD. I see it as a tool of ABCD. Getting people to start appreciating what's possible. Not talking about what's wrong, but talking about what's worked and talking about what is it that gives pride to our communities and whatever. And number 7 is this: creating positive change begins simply with conversation. This is the most basic tool we've got. How do we get people into conversation? I'm into now having what we call passion nights, where you invite people to the local pub to get passionate about our town and start talking about what could actually happen. Jim, drunks like that are just fantastic. They just turn up all the time and so on, But what we've got to realise is every revolution in this world started in a coffee shop or a pub somewhere, where people came together in conversation and started envisaging a different future and starting to put in plans to make it happen. And it seems to me the thing we've lost is being able to facilitate decent conversations with people. What do? We invite people to meetings like this, where you sit like you're in church. This ain't a conversation. This is a nodding head arrangement, both up here and down there. Your heads are starting to nod and so on, I need to give you a great example. This is a town we met, 22 people saying, what are we going to do? It's a dying town. People said people used to accelerate to get through our town. No one wanted to stop here and spend in local shops. What have we got? I said, as assets. And someone said, well, the name's not bad. Bulls. Couldn't we do something with that? It's an asset, the name. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, why don't we become the unforgettable town? Why don't we invite every business to change their label to include the word bull? And so the police station is... And so today you drive into this town and every building and every shop has been relabelled. The town's booming. Everyone's walking up and down the street, photographing. The bank is called Bankable. 6 months ago, the bank's held up. Someone comes in the middle of the night with a forklift and pinches the ATM machine and runs off with the ATM machine and all the money. The committee running this, very enterprising. Next morning, by 9 o'clock, they had a banner across the front of the bank saying, robbable. And it was on the front page of the national newspaper. What publicity for the town. I just love all the signs you got. The toilet, relievable, Every tourist wants to be photographed under the sign. It's the most popular. And I love the church, forgivable. The town hall is called sociable and all the rubbish bins are called responsible, It is just, this is a town who had fun. But that started in a conversation. People just getting together, one person putting up and wham, look at what they've done. It's amazing. That story has appeared in 4 international airline magazines. It just grabs people's amazing thing and so on. And so as a community, they've kind of discovered what is absolutely unbelievable, and the town is irresistible. And finally, the starting point for change is always mindset and positive attitudes. It seems to me that what asset-based stuff is get that hopefulness that Jody talked about. It's getting people starting to kind of talk up and whatever. I love this quote from Muhammad Yunus, who said, my greatest challenge has been to change the minds of people. We see things the way our minds have instructed our eyes to see. And it just seems to me that built into this, why ABCD is so powerful is that people start seeing things with fresh eyes, start seeing things in very hopeful kind of ways and whatever. I love this quote, the start for a better world is the belief that it is possible. And again, this is a very hopeful movement. And I think that's what makes it stand out from many other kind of initiatives. And I suppose my final story comes from this town called Christchurch. Back there in those late 80s, I've already talked about Kaikoura, but the whole of New Zealand was depressed. And this town, one of the cities, was number 13 out of 14 on a whole pile of employment and economic indicators. It was the second worst city economically and in terms of employment. And back then, they had a mayor who'd been there for 25 years, a mayor who'd had a charisma bypass at some stage in his life and nothing was actually happening and whatever. You know, the place was down, you know, that type of leadership. And so at the election, this young woman called Vicky Buck, she was 35 years old. She'd been on council since she was 17. Half her life had been spent on council, but she was only 35. And she got elected, and she had thousands of great ideas to turn the city around. The first day she's mayor, though, she suddenly discovers a fact. They're broke. There's nothing in the bank. The council is broke. So what did she do? She put an ad in the paper that said, "Hi, I'm Vicky Buck. I'm the new mayor of Christchurch. I need to tell you we don't have any money. But you know what? I've got a telephone, and this is the number. And you ring this number, and I, the mayor, will answer the phone. Ring it with your good ideas." She said, you can imagine a city of 300,000 people, how many crackpots would live in a city of that much? You know, there are thousands of Jim Deers in the, you know, live in that place. They would love to be able to pound the mayor with their latest fad. You know, she said, I've got every one of them. But you know what? I found there wasn't one resident in Christchurch who in the course of a shower hadn't thought of a good idea that would turn Christchurch around. And I became a conduit for it. You know, she introduced giraffe awards for people who were prepared to stick out their neck and have a go. She kind of like started to kind of like bring people together. She didn't have money for a business study. She found 5 volunteers to door knock every business in town and ask one question: what's stopping you from doing better? An incredible approach. And within 2 years, the city went from the second worst to the second best. And within a further year, number 1 in the country. You know, 3 years ago, Christchurch won the best managed local government authority in the world in an international local government competition. Amazing story. And I love sitting down with Vicky, and I love saying, and we've become great friends, and I'm just inspired by this woman. And I sit and I always say, Vicky, tell me again all your great ideas. And she almost consistently says to me, Peter, let me remind you that the starting point for change in Christchurch was mindset. We as a community had to start talking up and not talking down. I, as the leader of the town, had to start making negative people deviants, because that's what they are. And this is a favourite quote: I think negative people should be taxed. They require an incredible amount of energy. They're like corgi dogs nibbling at your ankles. And I'm sure they exist to show us the difference between heaven and hell, you know? You know? That's how she used to talk. One of her other great quotes was this: when facing a difficult task, act as if it's impossible to fail. When going after Moby Dick, bring along the tartare sauce. You know? Unfortunately, I used that at a local government conference in Australia the other week, and Greenpeace were in the audience, and boy, they were not happy with my analogy, you know. Can I just close by sharing you really my favourite quote, and I think it really captures what this whole process is about. The future is not a result of choices amongst alternative paths offered by the present, but it's a place that's created first in mind, next in will, then in activity. The future is not a place to which we're going. It is a place we're creating. And the paths to the future are not found but made. And the activity of making them changes both the maker and the destination. And that is what I love about ABCD. It is not the outcomes we achieve that most excites me, but it's the journey that's on it. We're on a journey which is not about a destination. It is about changing the whole way that we actually interact within community. It's an incredibly exciting way. And to see people engaging in this stuff, I think, is the rewarding part of it. I wish you well. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so that's part 3. That's the end of his 30-minute talk. I hope the lighting is okay, because it's getting dark outside, and I can tell that I gotta make sure I'm not looking at the camera too much. I can tell that's why I started looking at the camera. I think because of the light situation, I hope the video quality here is not going to be too poor, but I'm conscious of that as it's only today is what, the 20th of November, so for another month the it's going to be dark pretty soon when I'm driving home, and I can't drive with a light in my face. So just realize that. We'll figure it out. Okay. Back to Peter Kenyon's talk. Legless Les's courier service. Come on. The guy was condemned to death basically by the doctors. And all it took was one, motivated, encouraging person. And he turned his life around, started a business, filled a need, a gap in the community. And he lived for many years when nobody expected him to, because he had a purpose in life. How amazing is that? And then I think it's my favorite part of the whole video. Maybe there's so much, I love the whole thing, but the town or the village of Bulls. Bulls. Robbable. The bank. Relievable. The public toilets, relievable. Like, that's ingenious. It just makes me happy when I think of that. And I absolutely love this story from Peter Kenyon. And the final point when he talks about 2 points. Don't you see this all the time? He talks about the old mayor of, not all the time, there's exceptions to every rule, but his old mayor had been mayor of Christchurch for like 20 some years, and he had at some point in his past had a charisma bypass. That is spot on. It's spot on. We see that so often with politicians. Not all the time, but so often. You just get in there and you get in a rut and you're in the groove and it's not working and there's no passion anymore. You're just there to make sure you get elected again, and it brings the dynamism of the entire group, like, the entire government, whatever level, just brings the whole level down if you don't have a motivated and charismatic person involved. Charisma is not the only thing, don't get me wrong. You can have all kinds of charisma and not do anything worthwhile. But you need something to motivate the people who are, looking up to you as a leader. And so there comes in the new mayor of Christchurch, and Claudia? No. Darren, what was the name? Anyway, she comes in and said, call me up, you got good ideas. The award was a brilliant idea, the giraffe award, stick your neck out. And her quote there that Peter Kenyon read off, I think negative people should be taxed. That's it. Obviously you can't tax negative people, but there's nothing worse when you're the motivated individual trying to do something in your community and the negativity. And if you're involved in community development or community organizing or any nonprofit organization in your community and you're trying to do something positive, not everything you do is going to work. Sometimes you have ideas that shouldn't work and should get voted down and shouldn't go anywhere, and you'll realize later in life that maybe it was a bad idea. I can tell you lots of stories about that. But generally speaking, if there's other people there who are just always negative, always around you, just beating them down, that it's really frustrating and really tiring after a while to deal with those people. People say it can't be done. Sorry, I shouldn't. I think that's all my notes. Yeah. I think that's it. So I hope you enjoyed Peter Kenyon's talk. Like I said, I listened to that. I watch that video a number of times every year, and every time I do, it just, it's a big boost for me to start thinking positively. So that's it. Go to communityfromwithin.com, use the contact form to send me a message, Go on, if you're watching this on YouTube, click the like button, hit subscribe, get the alerts when there's videos coming out. And if you like the podcast version, it's available on Google Play, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and as of today, we're also on Spotify. So you can get the podcast out there in a number of places to listen to it. I think that's everything for today. Yeah, I really enjoyed Peter Kenyon's talk. Be wonderful someday in the future to get an interview with him and have a chat with him about community development, get his thoughts now going on 20 years later, if he's still motivated the way he was back then. So cheers everybody, take care, bye bye.